This is Legal Tech Week for December 18th, 2020. It is our last show of the year, and this is Bob Ambrogi. I write the blog Law Sites and also have the podcast Law Next, and might as well all introduce ourselves. We seem to have Santa here, it looks like. So Santa, you want to start? Surprise!
Oh, great. My phone's ringing. Apologies. Caroline Hill, Editor-in-Chief, Legal IT Insider. I'm going to go mute really quickly. I'm sorry about the phone ringing.
Okay. Nikki.
Nikki Black, the Legal Technology Evangelist with MyCase Law Practice Management Software. I write legal tech columns for Above the Law, ABA Journal, Daily Record, weekly posts on the MyCase blog, and other outlets.
All right, Joe.
Joe Patrice from Above the Law and Thinking Like a Lawyer and stuff like that. It's we're coming to the end of 2020, and what a fantastic year it was, everybody. I think we all are going to miss it.
Yeah, Victoria.
Hey everyone, my name is Victoria Hudgens. I'm based in Philadelphia, where I write for ALM. Mainly, you'll see my byline at Legal Tech News, where I cover the intersection of law and technology in the legal tech industry.
All right. And Molly?
Molly McDonough. I'm a media strategist and consultant based in the Chicago area. I produce Legal Talk Today, where my favorite interview of the year was of Santa.
Which you'll have to explain the legal connection there, but
I asked the only legal question.
Oh, okay. Steve, go ahead.
Me?
Yeah.
Steve Embry. I was a practicing lawyer for a good number of years as a litigator in a big law firm. And then I left 2 years ago to start the blog Tech Law Crossroads, which I currently write. And to Molly's point, I saw the movie Miracle on 34th Street the other night, where the lawyers successfully established that Santa Claus was real and that the Santa Claus in the courtroom was the real Santa Claus. So you should interview him.
Or as the Marx Brothers would have said, what's all this talk about a sanity clause? Zach.
Hey there, everybody. I'm Zach Warren. I'm the editor-in-chief of ALM's Legal Tech News, also on law.com and other ALM brands. And also now just thinking to myself whether Santa Hesse do not pay a lot because of all the places he parks his sleigh on people's roofs.
Yeah, and last but not least, Victor.
Hi, everyone. My name is Victor Lee. I am the assistant managing editor for the ABA Journal, covering the business of law and technology. I did not go with the beard, unfortunately. Sorry. Probably since I can't grow a beard myself, so I don't like putting fake beards on, so I don't like to give myself false hope. But I will plug Nikki. Nikki did an excellent year-end recap for us for her column for the ABA Journal. That should be live sometime next week. So I encourage everybody to check that out. She did a great job on it.
Are you saying I can grow a beard?
Thank you.
Is that a subject to GDPR, Molly?
No, I think he's saying don't anybody watch the show because they can just read about it in ABA Journal. And, well, we'll watch for that. But we are going to do a little bit of that. I mean, we usually recap the top news of the week, but it seems a missed opportunity at this point to not talk about the top stories of the year. And yeah, I know everybody's saying, well, we all know what the top story of the year was, which was COVID. And yeah, but there were permutations off of that, I think, that are worth talking about, and maybe some other stories that are worth talking about too. So I thought we could just kick off by going around, and I'm sure some of us will, there will be some redundancies here because there's only so much to talk about. But I'd love to hear everybody's thoughts on what they think were the top stories of the year in legal tech. And since Molly's wearing antlers, I think we should go with her first.
Awesome. For me, the top story has been and continues to be the widespread closure of the courts and all of the implications that had. And then on the tech side, how quickly some courts ramped up and pivoted or adapted to new technologies to bring their courts not only up to speed, but into the modern era. So I think that's going to be something that will continue on. And a lot of the learning we've had and experiences the courts have had have really pushed the courts to modernize and to find different ways that that folks can access the courts and the justice system outside of the old in-person laborious long trips and
You just muted yourself. You just got muted.
Sorry. Yeah. So that's my story.
Yeah. I'm going to guess that several of us agree with you on that being a really significant story. Steve, was that something you wanted to comment on too? You had talked about that too, I think.
Yeah, as a litigator, a former litigator anyway, I was surprised and encouraged by how not only courts, but to some extent lawyers began adopting to online proceedings, either in whole, going from bench trials to even jury trials online. I was talking to a lawyer the other day, and he and his adversary agreed to do their jury trial online versus waiting God knows when to have an in-person trial. And so I think it will have a downstream effect as more and more lawyers look at the ability to do things online and look at the convenience of being able to do things online. And it goes so far as, perhaps not a complete jury trial online, but portions of the trial to be online. And when you think about the convenience to the court, the convenience to the lawyers, and even the witnesses, of being able to do things online where you don't have to sit around a courtroom all day waiting to be called to be a witness and lose a day's pay. And jurors, right? The people that we sometimes forget about, online proceedings for them sure beats traveling downtown to a courthouse, paying to park, wasting days of time, not getting paid for the regular job, plus the disruption. So I think we'll have, the fact that courts are embracing this, I think will have an impact on lawyers who will be forced to embrace it, and even as far as clients who will require their lawyers to embrace it. So I think it's going to really change things across the litigation landscape.
Yeah. Anybody else want to comment on that?
I mean, I guess the flip side would be that, it remains to be seen whether or not, if and when the COVID crisis passes, people are just going to be like, oh, well, we can go back to normal now. Everything's done. Everything's great. And I mean, you would think that you wouldn't be able to, that we probably come too far in that regards. But I guess it remains to be seen whether or not, the legal profession can be very stubborn when it wants to be, as we've all seen, as we all know. So it'll be interesting to see how much of this is permanent, and how much of this is just kind of justified as, all right, well, those were extraordinary circumstances, once in a lifetime thing. Now we can just go back to doing things the way that we've always done it.
I think what's really fascinating for me is so I think what's really fascinating is, I think in the first half of the year there was a lot about survival and just like getting by, but in terms of using Zoom and all of that kind of stuff. But the interesting thing that's come through for me in the later half of the year is a realization that things are better. So that people have got better contact with their clients. Lawyers are realizing that face-to-face, video meetings is actually better than everyone on a conference call where you can't see who's speaking and everyone's like, who is that? Actually they're realizing that it gives them better interaction between remote offices, and so I feel like there's this awakening that actually this is kind of, there's an excitement almost. Perhaps I'm being a bit dramatic, it's the fizz, but I think that there's a different sentiment in the second half than there was in the first.
Yeah,
and I'll echo that with I had a conversation with a notable almost 80-year-old lawyer who was telling me, I never would have believed it, but Zoom, this thing's really great. You can get a hold of everybody. I feel more connected than ever. And like, it really is, even people who are soon to be octogenarians are embracing all of that tech. I would also add one interesting thing about the courts being closed that I found is earlier in the year, we did a special series, a COVID cast series, just about like changes in the law. And one of the most fascinating stories for me of the year was we talked to a jury consultant who was telling us that they'd done a study and they were thinking that what we're staring down the barrel of in the later half of the year and beginning of next year are juries that are going to be markedly more pro-business and stingy because courts are basically saying people can opt out of going to in-person jury because if they're afraid of COVID, and lo and behold, there's a political divide between who believes COVID's a threat in this country and who doesn't. And they were finding that the jury pools are going to be massively stacked in favor of people who don't believe it's a threat and believe businesses should be, protected from liability and stuff. It was a really interesting talk.
And it's even more than that because one of the hallmarks of the jury system is a representative jury of the community, and many people in the community simply don't have the capability of participating online in a jury trial, and most of those people are lower incomes, and that's a problem if those kinds of people are going to be excluded from participation. That's something that we will have to address as a system if we're going to continue going this route.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to echo a little bit of what Victor said in terms of looking at the other side of this. I think that when you try to predict whether lawyers will continue to use technology the way that they're using tech, you have to take ego and escape into consideration. And by that, I mean, lawyers will probably continue to use Zoom, I think, for some of those conversations that are long distance, right? And possibly for some client communications, if it's easier for the client. But for a lot of lawyers, their job fulfills their ego. It makes them feel better about themselves. It makes them feel important. And it's the interactions with the people in their office, with other lawyers, with people that they consider to be below them, that makes them feel special. And you don't get those interactions the same way with judges, hobnobbing with the judges. You don't get that same interaction through Zoom. So I think between the ego aspect and also the escape aspect. So a lot of lawyers use their jobs as an escape from home. And I think particularly of a lawyer that there was a partner in the law firm when I was an associate, and there was a huge snowstorm, and I'm from upstate New York, and normally I can drive through anything. But there was this crazy snowstorm, and I tried to get to work and I couldn't. It was the first time in my whole life that I haven't been able to just drive through the snow. And I got stuck like half a block from my house, and I just got the car out and turned around and came home. And I got into the office like 2 or 3 hours later, and I was the second person in the office. The other person in the office was a partner. And I was like, well, how did you get here? What are you doing? He's like, are you kidding me? And stay at home with my wife and kids on a snow day? I would have walked here. And like, I think that there's the being in the office and being in court and having this important job that is this excuse to sort of avoid some of those responsibilities. I think that a lot of lawyers use their jobs in that way. And so I think that this face-to-face thing is not going to go away. I do think that Zoom will be used when things are for convenience's sake. But and some people will be allowed to work remotely more than they had been in the past. But I still think that we're going to end up switching back just because the law is the law and lawyers are lawyers and you can't change them that quickly. I wish you could, but I think
the big change is in the perspective toward technology. It's not so much whether we're going to use Zoom or not, but it's in the overall attitude. And I think that's where the courts have probably changed the most dramatically. Susskind's book on the courts, which came out like right before all this happened. I mean, I swear he planned the whole pandemic just to sell that book. I'm kidding. But he talks in that book about how the problem with modernizing the courts is that you can't change the tire on a moving vehicle. Well, the vehicle came to a full stop and all the tires were flat, and the courts realized that they were all flat, and they immediately took steps to start to address that. And I think we've all heard any number of judges say over and over again this year that we needed to do this, and there's no turning back from the changes we've started to make. We still have a long way to go, but I really think the courts have finally understood. They've sort of answered the wake-up call for the first time about the need to modernize, and they're reacting to it in a way that there's no going back from.
I think it was Richard, or maybe
it was a kind of a forced beta.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it's like a forced beta test of so much so quickly. There has to be a period of analysis and review to see what's working, what's protecting rights. All of that still needs to happen. But like Bob said, there's so much to become converted judges who were never going to adopt technology, never wanted to deviate from their current practices, say that's what they could never go back.
Yeah. Yeah. I might have read this, but there was a letter, the chief justices of all the Massachusetts courts put out a letter this summer that I may have read. I'm not going to read the whole letter, but one thing they said in this, they said that, this is quoting the letter, before the pandemic, we expected that it would take years to make substantial progress. With the pandemic, we've made substantial progress in just a few months. Therefore, even when the pandemic is behind us, we do not believe we will or should go back to doing things as we did before.
Yeah, and
that's pretty cool.
I don't think necessarily those changes are predicated on attorneys adopting in. Like, I'm kind of preempting what I had for my weekly story this week, but a bunch of federal courts said we're going to be beta testing live streaming come February. 13 federal courts, and they were all over the place too, ranging from, I think, Tennessee to Idaho. There's a lot of people who took this opportunity to take a step back and say, hey, we can do things differently. We can introduce transparency. We saw the Supreme Court have telephonic hearings that a lot of people were able to call into. So if something like live streaming comes out of this, even if it's not necessarily attorneys saying, hey, we're cool with virtual courts, there's still some technology element that I think benefits the public at large.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's, that is an issue, I think, Zach, because, we have this concept in the United States that courts are open to the public, that, anybody that wants to go sit it through a trial or a hearing, you could walk to the courthouse and go through security and go sit in. What does that mean in a virtual world, in an online world? Now, granted, I can't for the life of me imagine why somebody would want to go watch some, IP litigation going on in a federal court, but you're supposed to be able to, right? So,
right. So we just kind of meshed up, I think, a lot of people's top stories in that conversation, because we kind of talked about more than courts. But
can I elaborate on? So what's really interesting about so I think my top story, not in terms of the theme, and I've just did a bunch of interviews for the Orange Rag with a bunch of CIOs, and every single one was talking about premises and how to actually deliver. So we're talking about the tech, we're talking about Zoom, right? So, but what the conversation that was coming through so strongly from every single CIO I spoke to was, how do we deliver what's coming next year, right? So that it's all about hybrid, and it's all about, we're going to be like, but how many people are going to be in the office, right? And some of them were saying, do you know what? If they all decide to work from home, then we're going to have to respect that. Some of them are taking a much, different line, like 60-40 or whatever. But from a business right now, they're trying to plan when they don't know what's happening, and then from a business services and tech perspective, it's really like trying to juggle jelly. But on the other hand, the really cool thing and a challenge was like, what does the hybrid office look like? And they're going to have to they're really looking at space, right? So for one of the first times, I think like facilities came through really strongly in my conversations. Like, how do they make the office really tech enabled, so that when you do, for example, a half meeting where you've got some people in the office and some people are out, it's not, I can't hear, move the conference phone in the middle. Like, it's like, how do you make it good and not rubbish? And like, there's so many conversations going on now behind the scenes. And I think we've seen that coming through the whole year, right? So that for the first time, they've really gone agile. This is the first year when agile is the norm. That's amazing. But now it's like, what does that look like? I think it's so for me, the theme of the year has obviously been where people are, the agile working. And it's like, how the hell do you deliver that going forward? It's exciting, but it's also going to be a massive challenge.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it's in flux too. For something different I was on yesterday, I was looking up some of our tech survey numbers, and they were just back in August, September, not too far ago. And when we talked to CIOs, he said, okay, so are you expecting your real estate to change within the next year? About a third said, yes, we're expecting it to decrease. About 10% said, no, we're keeping it static. But what really stood out to me is 55% said, we have no idea because everything is so in flux right now. And I think that's going to continue. And I think that's still the case, even though we're currently in law firm budgeting season. Nobody quite knows what the future is going to look like, even with the advances in COVID vaccine technology and all that. There's just no consensus whatsoever, even within individual firms.
And because what's fascinating is that although you can take a hard line in theory, it's one of those things about you can't force people to come into the office, right? If there are people that are uncomfortable, what are you going to do? You're going to take a hard line and then everybody rebels, or, they're not comfortable in public transport because, it's one of those things where culturally, I think it's been a massive challenge. Like they have to actually respect people's attitudes and try and work out what that looks like. And they have to kind of build consensus. They can't just sort of stamp and say, this is what's happening. Because when people's health is on the line, they could just turn around and have like a rebellion. Although, as was it Molly was saying, was about, I'm sure a lot of people can't wait to get back in the office. That's
and what's the rationale now for requiring people to come to the office? I mean, we've proven that there's no need to do that. And why would you force anybody to do that? I mean, other than the old geezer partners like Nikki was talking about who just want to get out of the house and have a place to go. I mean, why do we even need law offices anymore?
I think for those important meetings, like strategy meetings, there's a feeling that you have to be, or for certain things where you really need to, but then for reading emails, you need to be in the office. Sorry, Joe, was you saying something?
Oh, no, I wasn't. I unmuted myself, but I didn't say anything.
There's a firm management issue too, because the second highest cost for law firms is real estate,
right?
Which, in part is because they're all downtown in high-rise luxurious buildings. But, at some point I wonder, as more and more people elect to work from home, whether law firm leadership is going to say, we could save a lot of money here, Yeah.
I mean, I definitely, I do when law firms open up new offices, I like to, if they invite me, I like to do a tour and write up how fun their new office looks. And the trend of the last couple years has been smaller footprints. We don't need as much space. We are more flexible. More people do work from home. More people collaborate. Fewer offices by yourself, but more conference rooms so that you can just go grab a conference room if you need to be on the call. Some people rebelled against that, but in a lot of ways, it seems as though that's the logical solution as we're going through all this, because a lot of those firms have smaller footprints and are doing much better because they didn't have the giant rent check over their heads every week.
Yeah, it'll be interesting because like sort of on the flip side of that, it's like, what is the psychology still behind having that big fancy office downtown? It's to impress people. It's to say, hey, we're these big shots. We have, all this money. We have all these great lawyers. We have all this cool art on our windows, on our walls. We have all these fancy boardrooms named after important partners you probably never heard of. So, I do think that that's still going to be part of it. Like, you're going to want to have that, that physical footprint where you can, impress people, you can entertain, you can, maybe bring clients in and throw your big parties and whatnot. But yeah, as far as making sure everyone's seated in a cubicle at a given time during the day. I mean, yeah, as long as they're getting the work done and they can show it and they can bill it. So who cares?
I thought it was kind of interesting that with this COVID-19 and more law firms working remotely, that you did start to see, I think law firms were saying because of the economic downturn, that they were letting go of their secretary staff and kind of saying hey, we can still get things done when people are working remotely and we don't need someone outside of someone's office working. And already that trend was occurring beforehand, but you saw that kind of law firms saying, okay, we definitely know we can get this done. Let's pull the trigger on this now. And I think Benjamin Moore letting go of their 4-member corporate legal department and just outsourcing them. I'm kind of interested, will that be a trend that we see, especially with those corporations with those small small legal departments and they just say, hey, we don't need a GC, we'll just outsource everything. So to kind of course, that won't be a model that all corporate legal departments will want to take on or will be able to take on, but it'll kind of be interesting to see like how, if that trend will continue, especially with people getting more comfortable working remotely and and corporations and law firms saying, maybe we don't need this real estate space that we were taking up with either secretaries or with our legal department.
You know, the secretary thing is something that really grinds my gears. And I've been talking about this on the Thinking Like a Lawyer podcast, KR, and I talk about this quite a bit. It's the problem with it is obviously this needed to happen for a while because you don't need an assistant for every lawyer anymore because people can now do their own word processing and so on and so forth. But the problem, and I understand the logic of it, but it's a tragic logic, is that when times are good, these law firms go, we know we need to get rid of these folks eventually, but we can afford it. Let's keep this going. And they only choose to fire them when the economy craters, and those folks now are left with nowhere else to go. We have a backward system of dealing with the staff changes that need to happen. And it's so annoying. And I feel for all the staff people who have been kind of let go throughout all of this because they're being let go in a way that probably needed to happen in the way that business is changing, but at the worst possible time. It's awful. Anyway.
Another side to that story that I've heard repeatedly this year from people that I speak to who work in large law firms is that there has been a kind of a flattening of the hierarchy within law firms, that the so-called allied professionals, what we used to call non-lawyers, all the people who work in the law firms who are not lawyers feel that there has been a more of a leveling of roles through this pandemic, in part because suddenly we're all on Zoom and we're all seeing into each other's bedrooms and living rooms, and the kids are all the big partners, just like everybody else, have kids running around screaming in the background and all that stuff. But also in part because the firms, some of the firms probably became more acutely aware than ever before of what these allied professionals do for them, and the roles that they fill and the work that they do, and how important they are to keeping the firm alive and supporting the practices that the lawyers engage in. So that's a positive, I think, that will have perhaps lasting repercussions.
But then on the other hand, so we've talked about trial lawyers using Zoom. So I was talking to a CIO just this week, and they were saying he was talking about a trial lawyer who, up until the pandemic, would get he didn't do anything himself. He would even get his assistant to print emails, and would be really old fashioned. And now he does everything himself. He does everything. He's running depositions on Zoom, and I think, Joe, it's a really good point. I think the trouble is that this has forced people, whereas before I think a lot of people really did still depend on their PA, right? And they needed them psychologically and physically in some cases outside their office. A lot of it was status, a lot of it was they were incapable of doing stuff. I think because they've been forced to go digital, I think the timing is awful, but I think that I don't see that bit going back, in terms of that point, unfortunately.
The other thing that to jump off of your point, I don't know if my connection is still bad, but if you can hear me, okay.
Yep.
For Bob's point, one of the other things that I've seen is that how many law firms and lawyers understand more thoroughly the technology that they have. And that it has features that they could have been leveraging ages ago, but they actually started to use. And Teams stands out as one. So I hear from people all the time, "Oh, we had this." This is actually really useful.
Yeah, I think if your connection goes out again, you need to adjust the antenna there.
Yeah. They're also training, aren't they? They're engaging in training voluntarily. I don't know if you're hearing this, but so whereas before it was like plucking teeth, and trying to get people, now they're actually, it's come up time and time again that people are voluntarily trying to understand how things work, which is a new thing.
Yeah. So couple of other I think big stories of the year that folks have brought up in our email exchange before this. Joe has one and Victor has one. Joe, so what you've talked a lot about this year, but fill us in.
Yeah. So Jeffrey Toobin needs to know how to turn off his camera. No, though that was a big legal technology story, I suppose, of the year.
And you didn't even fill us in on the one last week, which I was really disappointed in. But
what do you mean? The most recent
the partner getting oral sex.
Oh yes, the partner. Yes, that was. Wow. Yeah, actually, that's a good point. That was incredible. And I've seen the video without the blurring of the face and like, oh my, it's yeah. Anyway, so partner did that. You can look it up on Above the Law. So too, but no, what I've talked a lot about, almost as much as Nikki's talked about avatars, is the bar exam and the way in which the bar exam moving online was kind of a slow motion disaster. Obviously, it's better than holding it in person, but they didn't really have a plan for how this was going to work. ExamSoft did its best, frankly. I mean, I don't give them a ton of credit on things, but I will give them credit on they did what they, I guess, needed to do to get it to spit and Scotch tape get together. But just constantly we had these issues. We had, and I know Victoria and I both wrote pieces about the algorithm for facial recognition was consistently saying that Black and brown people weren't really there, which is a huge problem that can't really be swept aside ever. It was also flagging people as cheating for all sorts of normal behaviors. Because it wasn't a human, meant that people weren't allowed to take bathroom breaks and stuff that they would in an in-person exam, which led to a story that was shared with us of somebody who actually had to urinate on themselves in the middle of the test because they dared not walk away. These are problems, and this is a sign that something bigger needed to happen. We just learned this week that California flagged a third of the applicants as cheaters, because the algorithm spit out that they're cheating. And rather than, take some time to delve into whether or not the algorithm was right or wrong, they presumptively sent all these people notices saying, you're cheaters, prove that you aren't. It's a broken system. And I think it was probably broken beforehand, but the way in which technology and the pandemic have kind of forced us to come to grips with the way that the testing and licensing regime in this country isn't really up to snuff, has been a big story.
And do you think it's a story that's moving toward any kind of a resolution?
I am hopeful. I do think that California, despite their shenanigans this week, I think that the California Supreme Court has suggested that they're starting to get open to the idea that maybe this is all a mess and that they should engage in some fundamental overhaul of the system. Obviously, diploma privilege was a popular overhaul. The idea that maybe, just maybe, instead of having our law schools be cash cows, we should force them to teach up to a certain level such that we can trust that anyone who goes to them and comes out is eligible to be a lawyer. But that's not the only way. There are some proposals, and California seems interested in a few of them, to change the generalist bar exam, which is a generalist, which very few lawyers really are anymore, and based on memorization, which, I mean, the practice of law is an open book exam every day, right? Right. You would not hire somebody who refused to look something up. And for that reason, they've been interested in some options that would be more practice area based certifications and some ideas that are more skills based and open book. And that kind of process, I think, could be valuable. And I think it's a lot like what you were saying about, which I guess Suskin said, but about the changing the tires on a moving vehicle. The way in which the bar exam fundamentally broke under COVID has encouraged more people to start talking about maybe we had this licensing thing all wrong from Jump Street.
Right. Now you're talking heresy to suggest law school should actually teach practical skills and
yeah. No, I know. I understand some people are going to be upset about that, but
didn't you write about someone having a baby doing the exam? Was that you?
No, it wasn't me, but Stacy wrote about it. But it was above the law, like we had it, and I think other outlets did too. But yeah, Stacy wrote about this woman who had a baby during it because you can't possibly have a licensing system that doesn't put people in a place where they have to choose between having a child and having the test.
Yeah.
I think one of the interesting things about that debate, this is the best way to put it, it sort of, in a nutshell, revealed some of the problems with the profession. You have an interest group that exerts enormous pressure on everyone to maintain the status quo. You've got a group of I don't want to say older lawyers, but traditional lawyers who insist, despite the fact that they tried to take the exam today, they probably couldn't because they're antitrust lawyers or whatever they are. And then you have this other group of more liberal, if you pardon the term, approach and examination of the validity of the whole concept. And to me, it's sort of a microcosm of many of the things that are wrong with the profession in many ways.
Yeah, and then I guess another major development this year, Victor, you flagged, and I guess actually Nikki, I realized you flagged it as well in your ABA Journal article, which is probably where Victor stole it from in the first place, I suppose. But I
think he may have given me the suggestion to include it. I think it was. Let's give him the credit for this one.
Yeah, I'm just teasing. But Victor, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Like for me, the biggest story was the Utah and Arizona courts changing the ethics rules to allow for some form of alternative business structure, be it hybrid firms where you have non-lawyer ownership, different kind of structures that have previously been banned. And it's just for those of us who've been following this for a long time, it's like that always seemed like the third rail. Like that was the thing that was never going to happen. Like if you let these money grubbing companies into our sacred profession, then it's going to be a terrible thing. It's going to put profit over representation. It's going to damage the sanctity of law, and it's going to be a consumer rights issue and this and that. And and who knows? Maybe all those things could come true. Maybe all those things will happen at some point. But I think what these states kind of looked at everything, and they decided, okay, look, the bottom line is the justice system just does not work for like a large percentage of people. They can't get adequate representation. They can't get adequate access to justice. The courts are very inaccessible or too expensive or too complicated for them. And something has to be done to try to adjust that. And if it means allowing these new business structures and to come in and to try to address that, then so be it. And so it'll be interesting to see where they go. Obviously, like Arizona went a little bit further than Utah. Arizona completely changed their ethics rules, whereas Utah put like a 2-year sandbox period, like experimental to see how it goes. So, but it'll be interesting to see where this goes and to see if this catches on in other places. I mean, there are other states that are looking at doing things similarly, but those are the only two that have acted so far.
Yeah, at least for me, this is the story. I mean, everything with COVID is obviously huge, the move to remote working, that's going to have ramifications. But if there's one trend that I think is incomplete and definitely is something worth following into next year, this is it. Because especially it happened, August? I don't think we've really seen the ramifications of what exactly opening up those rules means yet. We haven't really seen anybody take full advantage and take market share from law firms. If that's going to happen, it would happen a little bit down the road. We haven't seen, to Victor's point, whether some bigger states, or at least states with more lawyers, like California, like New York, like Illinois, might be next on this. We haven't seen a larger professional services organization like someone in the Big Four, whether they would try and licensed lawyers in those states and try and move in. So I definitely 100% agree, but I also think this is probably something we're going to be talking about in this version of the webcast in 2021, because there's just so much up in the air with it.
When it happened in the UK, it took ages. I remember when we obviously have had a market, we've had a deregulation for years, and I mean, I expect it'd probably be quicker for lots of reasons than it was in the UK, but it took a long time. And then it seemed like once it did start to happen, then it snowballed. But I think, yeah, it'd be really fascinating to see how long it takes before you see much change.
Yeah. What I think is remarkable is that this year has really been kind of a perfect storm in terms of all these different things happening. And most of them were attributable to COVID. The regulatory reform efforts were underway well before the pandemic ever came along. And they were kind of moving along at a little bit of a snail's pace, but they were moving quicker in Arizona and California and Utah than elsewhere. But the things that happened there were kind of already on track to happen. But those regulatory reform events happening, combined with this greater awareness around, the courts and the need to use technology to deliver legal services, and the need to reform how we educate lawyers and train lawyers, and all of these things coming together this year has really did, I think, create a perfect storm, a good perfect storm in terms of the impact it's going to have. I keep, the phrase I have heard so many times this year has been silver lining in this pandemic, and it just seems that for the legal profession, this really has been, a boot in the ass or something, essentially, to get us thinking and changing the way we do things, and hopefully it'll carry forward.
Yeah, I think that's a good point too, though, that kind of is an overarching topic among a bunch of these that I've heard from people, is not necessarily that anything that happened in 2020 is new. It's just that boot in the ass. It's people were already going remote, but this just accelerated the process. Courts were starting to modernize a tiny bit, accelerated the process. Same thing with opening up the ownership rules. And I don't think that necessarily anything here was like revolutionary or completely out of left field. It was stuff that was starting to get the ball rolling already. This is just a very heavy shove.
And I'll just add to that it's also just a massive proof of concept. So it's not just that, the tools were there, hadn't really been tried in a big way or in a big project in a public way, and with everybody on the same level playing field. Everybody had to do it, no excuses, to at least try, and not a lot of pushback if it failed, or were able to make adjustments fairly quickly because of that. So that's just completely unusual for a situation like this. So it's that kind of boot, but then also this just massive proof of concept. So I think that's what, if anything, is going to keep us moving forward in terms of adapting new technologies and really putting them to use. And that's one of the main reasons I don't think that we're really going to take too many steps backwards with in-person. I think we'll continue to see this because there's just been too much proof of concept that much of this works better, more efficiently, greater access than we were in the past.
And it's also been fascinating.
Not only is it
Sorry, Steve. There you go.
Not only is it a boot and a proof of concept, but so many, particularly the large law firms, they're having record years, right? So, if they had terrible years, then you might say, well, it's all because of that stupid Zoom and we had to do things. But no, the whole world changed. We all went home to work and we all made more money. What's wrong with that?
I think for me what's fascinating from a vendor point of view is things that someone pointed out, that things like, although to Zach's point, there's nothing revolutionary, at the same time, when you look at what some of them have done, like with Teams, which was not really top of Microsoft's list of development projects, and suddenly they have invested so much time and made so many changes. And with Zoom, which obviously is the darling of 2020, the way they have scaled that, and the way that they rose from, I forget what it was, from like 10 million to 200 million users, and the transparency which they they obviously came in for a lot of flack, but I think there's a lot of real lessons from a vendor point of view as well, in terms of it wasn't revolutionary, but it's been a really big, there's going to be case studies for years to come, I think, in terms of how the vendors have handled it.
Hey, can we take a second to pour a little out for Skype, who managed to bungle all of this? How in the world did Skype not become the biggest company in the universe? And I guess that's Microsoft, right? But which I guess they are pretty big. But how did they screw this up? This was tailor-made for them.
Yeah, they suck worse than ever. I think we want to call out Courtney Troutman's comment here about diversity, focus on Me Too, Black Lives Matter. And she says diversity in the bar, law firms, or lack thereof became the biggest issue of all. It's been a huge issue this year, but I'm feeling cynical about whether it's had a lot of impact, whether there's been much movement. There's a lot of talk. There's been a lot of hot air about it. I just heard about some numbers that are maybe coming out soon that paint a not an overly rosy picture of how well we've done in diversity this year in the legal world. But what do you think?
That's kind of the point, right? The fact that there are numbers now. Getting back to when Brian Parker was on here earlier on in the year, a lot of what he talked about is just the need for actionable intelligence, the need for those numbers to actually be able to shine a light on what's happening in a lot of these law firms and corporate legal departments. It's one of those, you have to start somewhere to make the change, and having the numbers to point to that says, yes, this is bad, is at least somewhere to start.
Well, and the pandemic, a lot of studies have shown, has had a disparate impact on women, and particularly women who are women of color. It's in terms of people that got laid off, in terms of they were the ones that suffered the most in the legal field and outside of the legal field. But a lot of the women who were non-equity partners, if they're going to axe a partner, they're going to axe that partner. And that's what they did. There was a lot of that going on. And so there was a lot of a disparate impact in that way. And it also, another thing that happened to women generally is that all of they had to school their children, or assist them with homeschooling and work full time from home. And they ended up shouldering, according to a lot of studies that have been done, a lot of that work, even though there's significant others, usually, their husbands or, were the ones that were, or partners were the ones that were also there. But somehow the women ended up shouldering a lot of those responsibilities. So it also, in some ways, just highlighted, women's plight in life. And I'm not sure that it necessarily, so I don't see how it fixed it, other than showing that everybody has kids, and we're all, I don't know.
Well, but part of the problem, of course, is, most firms, you make more money through origination credits, right? And a lot of firms have very archaic rules about who gets origination credit that may not have anything to do with actually who wins the client or a case, but more to do with what has traditionally been done. And the result of that is old white men have more, by and large, origination credits in most law firms than younger people of color and women. And that impacts the compensation of the younger people of color and of women. And it also impacts the power within the firm, because, let's face it, most firms, the partner with the most power is the partner that has the biggest book of business or has the biggest book of origination. And unless and until clients who profess an interest in diversity and inclusion begin to insist on more transparent and fairer compensation and origination credits system, I'm not sure that we're going to see a change.
Yeah, that's interesting, Steve, that you brought that up, because I know my colleagues at Corporate Counsel, they've been writing about that, especially with the summer of 2020 some general counsel are saying like they had to take the initiative to ask about like, hey, you have this original credit, and they're saying like this is our the billing partner, but the person I reach out to, or I'm emailing, or I'm asking for status reports, for status updates about, isn't that lawyer? Like, why aren't you paying them? Or they should be tasked with like saying that they're leading the matter. So I really think, and some people say, well, some corporate counsel, like all the professional life has been in-house legal department, so they don't really know kind of like how law firms work. But it really has to be on the general counsel to say, hey, asking questions and kind of insisting like how this person should be compensated, or who should be kind of origination credit, or saying like who gets the extension of work credit, and kind of leading that effort. Because law firms, it kind of seems like they'll just say, oh, I don't know, they got this work 30 years ago, I'm going to assume that they're still leading it. But it's on the general counsel to really say like, hey, look into this further. So I think it's kind of like some general counsel are starting to get that feeling, just kind of like you can control more, you can ask more questions, and you can be more demanding.
Yeah. So I'm just wondering what people, I think both Victor and Nikki expressed a little bit of maybe pessimism about just exactly how lasting some of these changes are. What do other people think? What's the next year going to look like? Are we going to continue to see forward movement in some of these areas, that some of the positives that we've talked about, or do we just go back to, we all get our vaccines and go back to business as normal?
I think my main worry, especially after everything that happened in 2020, is that even forward movement will look like stagnation. Just because I think it will be very tough to have as much forward movement in any particular year as you did this year, just because, kind of to your point earlier, everything stopped and you were able to change the tires on the car. Once you get the car rolling again, it makes it a little bit tougher. So I think we will start to see movement. We will continue to see movement, but maybe not at the breakneck velocity that we saw in 2021. And whether that looks like stagnation to some people, very well might.
I think it's interesting. I think it's going to be that culture that, as usual, it's going to be probably come from the top. Do you think? I think in terms of, I think if you've got progressive management who recognise the opportunities and who are conveying the right tone to and continuing to provide that, that sort of positive message and convey this sort of like, you can do your sort of projects in the office and your strategy meetings, but you can do your emails from home and really make it work for them. I think that those are the firms, I hope to see that. But I think as usual, if you've got slightly more old-fashioned senior management, I can see that there will be what we would consider a regression. I don't know whether that strikes a chord with anybody else. That's if people get, bear in mind, we don't know what's going to happen in terms of whether people are actually going to, I think there's a logistical issue as well with getting people back in the office that's going to stand in the favor of continuing things as they are. Like people either will be giving up space and having to manage their space better, or, I think they're going to have to continue to maintain COVID-friendly sort of premises and all that kind of thing. That's going to stand in the favor of continuing sort of more sort of tech first, more progressive practices, probably.
Mm-hmm.
So to Nikki's point about women taking on the burden, I can't even tell you how many women I know who are dying to get back into the office.
I'm really sorry. I didn't join in that conversation because outside my son is rolling up and down the corridor on rollerblades and he had a crash, and I'm just messaging my husband going, help! So I apologise for not joining in that bit about women, which is quite close to my heart. I was trying to message. He's crying. So it kind of goes to that point somehow.
I think Zach makes a good point. Let's face it. We are all social animals and we like being around other people. I like going to trade shows and seeing Bob and Molly and Joe and if I were able to do that today, if we could all do that safely, I'd probably do that. And hopefully in 2021, that'll be the case. Now, on the outside looking in, you could say, well, that's regression. We've kind of gone back to the old way. On the other hand, there's certain baseline that sort of human contact that I think all of us crave, frankly. But I think we will continue to see people working at home. I think we'll see clients insisting that travel be reduced substantially because it's expensive. I mean, why fly to California if I'm on the East Coast for a 3-hour deposition and I can do it, via video. So I think there'll be lasting changes.
Now that I've got an avatar, I'm never going back. That's it. Virtual conferences for me from now on.
I agree with the travel. I can't see. So I've heard about people who've flown to Sydney for an hour meeting and all kinds of like really crazy stuff like that, which now I'm sure everyone's reflecting on it going, why would I do that? I'm sure there's like
Right.
lots much more sensible practices in terms of travel. We love to get together. I can't wait to see everyone, but do I want to go to somewhere far-flung for an hour meeting? No.
Yeah.
Unless it has to have like a wet signature or something, which is still obviously a thing.
Yeah. Yeah. We haven't expressly talked about this yet. And Molly, you cover access to justice issues a lot. I'm just wondering what you think, in the few moments we have left, what you think has been the impact this year on serving those who cannot afford the big firms and the wealthy lawyers.
I do think that's a huge challenge and a huge progress point for courts. And one area is the justice involved community. So there are a lot of folks who really have a tough time making it to a proceeding or a hearing or an administrative proceeding that have been able to have those appointments made by Zoom or phone. And that's been a huge step forward in terms of creating access points for those communities, the justice involved communities. And that also goes into healthcare too. So I think that there's been a lot of progress there. Also, just a ton of work left to be done. As the eviction moratorium start to expire, I think we're going to see some pretty big impact. And landlords also need to be able to collect money and keep their businesses and pay their bills. But at the same time, I think there's going to be a big crisis, and I don't think the courts are really ready to manage that process yet. And you can see it with the panicky responses or pleas from politicians asking for extensions and trying to figure out, how to do this. But you can't kind of kick the ball down the road forever.
Yeah, no, I've talked to 2 different housing court judges in Massachusetts in the last 2 weeks, and both have said there's just no way we're going to be able to handle this when the floodgates open. It's just beyond our capacity.
And they're more. We're going to have to look at the data to see, how things went really for some of these communities. But there are some major equity issues with online courts, online hearings. Are defendants from lower incomes treated the same as defendants from higher incomes? And then that everything comes into play. Not just your technology, but your backgrounds and how you're being presented and represented in that space. So all of those things are going to need to be looked at. And so far, we're not seeing a ton. I'm not seeing a ton of progress for low income and underrepresented population.
Who wants to have the final word for 2020? Any final thoughts?
I just wanted to mention that my ABA Journal article that is about the top 5 legal tech stories in 2020 will be coming out next week. So keep an eye out for that. And it covers a lot of, pretty much runs the gamut of everything. Covers what we just talked about today, but keep an eye out for that.
Sounds good. All right. Well, everybody have a great holiday season. Thanks to all of you for doing this this roundtable this year. It's been a lot of fun, and it's really been a lot of good conversations. And if you're all up for it, we can come back next year and pick it up again. What else we got to do?
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays to everybody.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Stay safe.
Bye.